Welcome to the show for all of us. I'm Sarah Moran. I'm a journalist and educator focused on self care and health and well being. And I really appreciate you joining me today. In this episode, we're going to be talking about emotions and a new way to look at emotions and work with them in a healthy and skillful way. And all of that will allow us to feel more centered, more grounded. And it's a huge, huge part of self care, learning to be comfortable with and work with our emotions. Really, really critical for our well being, our mental health. And of course, our emotional health has a huge impact on our physical health as well. And emotional awareness is one of the biggest pieces of self awareness, which I talk about in episode 2 and 3. And I would invite you, if you haven't heard those, to go back and have a listen about why self awareness is so important and about some really specific ways that you can build or deepen your self awareness. But today we're going to be focused on the aspect of emotions. Um, Emotions are also just a wonderful guide and can really help you navigate in terms of internal or external changes that might benefit you. And this is also a really important thing to be looking at right now because we are in a big time. There's a lot of emotions flying around out there, and you might be experiencing a lot of emotions coming up inside of yourself as well. And when we're in a time where there's rapid change, there's a lot of intensity, there's a lot going on, having emotional awareness and skills and tools to work with emotions is huge. It's a really big part of resilience. Resilience is about sort of the ability to prepare for challenging or adverse situations and then cope with, adapt, respond to, navigate, and then recover from challenges. And so, learning to work with emotions and having these skills is a huge investment that will basically help you weather the storms better. They're sort of like a buoy system. And the more aware and skilled we are with emotions, there's so many other benefits too. I would say that relationships is one of the big ones, and also in your work, and there's a lot of other areas that um, kind of trickles into. So, we know that dealing with emotions in a healthy, skillful way is super important and good for our health. But there's actually very little that's taught or modeled in a helpful way around this area. A lot of people are still not that comfortable actually with emotions. And that's why I want to give you all a new way to look at them. And then I'm going to be sharing some really specific tools and practices for working with emotions. I'm going to have sort of a part 2 of this episode coming up soon. But the very next episode is going to be about one of my favorite tools for working with emotions. It is really effective, it's well studied, it's easy to learn, it's easy to do, it's super accessible. Kids can do it, anybody can do it. And I'm really excited to share about that with you. So stay tuned for that in my next episode. And before we dive in, I want to give you one other little, I guess, piece of evidence that I feel is neat to think about why emotions are so important. And this comes from Bonnie Ware, who worked in palliative care. So she's helping people who have gone home to die. And she wrote the book, The 5 Regrets of the Dying. And from my perspective, 3 of those 5 actually relate to emotions. And that is, so again, these are people's kind of top regrets, the themes that she saw. One was expressing one's true feelings. The other is being more genuine. And then a third is finding more joy in life or letting themselves be happier. Okay, so we're going to kind of start with a summary and then I'll go back and kind of dive into this. Basically, emotions are just one form of energy. They're part of the deal with being human. They are not good or bad. Although there are helpful or unhelpful ways to deal with them, and they are meant to, come in and then sort of move through us. So I'm going to start with emotions are energy. Everything is energy. Einstein established this with the E equals mc squared. The quantum sciences, the deeper you get into that, fundamentally everything is energy. And looking at it that way can kind of help us see emotions a little bit more as a witness or an observer, and to see that they are fluid and can shift and change and transform, because all of that is true about energy and all of that is true about emotions. And in case talking about energy feels nebulous to you, let's just make it really simple. If you stop and think about how you feel, if you just receive the best news, something that you're so excited about, just all of a sudden it's like whoosh, you're filled with this energy, and your whole body and being sort of comes alive, and you can feel that, right? That's the result of that emotion. And then on the other end, if you imagine how you feel when you receive some devastating news, and it's like whoosh, the life force feels like it's sort of left your system and you feel drained. That's just the energy difference there. So, um, okay, so let's talk a little bit about what are emotions. I don't want to get too academic here. I want to keep it simple, but I think it's helpful to have a little bit of context. So the first thing with emotions is that there's some kind of a stimulus, some kind of event that happens or experience. This can be a thought. So like we have a thought, and then something happens. So the second thing is that the brain and the body respond, and they respond fast, like rapid fire. The emotional part, we have different parts of our brain. The emotional part of the brain functions really quickly and faster than the logical or analytical or the thinking part of the brain. And then what happens is we have this internal experience where there are many hundreds of biochemical reactions. Your neurotransmitters, your hormones, all these natural chemicals sort of flood into the system. They're in the bloodstream, they reach your organs, and they affect every system in the body. And this can either feel good if it's a renewing emotion, or it can feel not so good, and kind of be draining on your system, depending on what the vibration or sort of frequency or feeling tone of that emotion is. And then we have some like automatic responses. So that is reflected in facial expressions. And for example, a physiological change like the heartbeat maybe starts to go faster, as an example, and you feel something. And that can sometimes then lead into, a behavior or an action that is external. When we talk about emotions, some people say all the emotions boil down to two things. It's either love or it's fear. And then we can kind of get more specific and more specific yet. And for example, if you say, I feel happy, but then get even more nuanced with that. I feel hopeful. I feel eager. I feel excited or silly or sad. Okay, I feel sad. What's a way to be more specific with that? I feel empty, disconnected, hopeless, lonely. And then sensations are a really important part of emotional awareness too. And I think because they really get at the heart of it, they actually get at more of the energy behind the label or word that we use to describe it. which would be the word of the particular emotion. So for example, with the sensations, we might say I feel hot or jittery or open and light, or I feel like I got punched in the gut. And some people will have, it's one of these will come easier than the other, like the words versus the sensations. And I just think it's really great to be aware of both. That can be really helpful in your kind of overall emotional awareness. Okay, so some important things to know about emotions. Um, Number one, they are just part of the deal with being human. And that means that they're meant to be experienced. Um, they are part of the full range of life on planet Earth, and we are multidimensional. We're not just one thing, and we're not just going to experience one set of emotions like the positive. We're also going to experience the contrast, and it's just part of the deal. And I think coming to acceptance of that, or just reminding ourselves of it, like this is part of the deal with being human. I'm going to have emotions, can be very helpful in and of itself. And then number two, a expert on emotions, Elizabeth Lewis, who is a stress resilience teacher, a grief specialist, works in personal development. She really reiterates that emotions are not good or bad, right or wrong. They are just information telling us something we need to know. And coming back to that again and again, I think is really helpful. And again, there are ways to then deal with our emotions that are helpful and beneficial or that are harmful, but we'll get to that later. So Elizabeth talks about how emotions can really guide us. They're often there to, tell us there's something important to know about or just something to look at or be aware of. There's something maybe to process or to address. There might be something that needs some healing. And I will say that we don't always like our emotions. They can be really uncomfortable physically and in our minds when they spin, especially. We don't like to feel anger or envy, jealousy. It's uncomfortable to feel overwhelm or anxiety, or the heaviness of grief and loss. So we might not like these emotions. But coming back to the understanding that we can work with them, that they're often there for a reason, and that they're part of the deal with being human can help with that discomfort. And what's very important is sometimes with, those emotions we don't like to feel, it's really important that we don't have shame or guilt about them. So as Elizabeth said, it's not right or wrong, it's not good or bad, it just is information. Um, there's no reason to judge emotions. They're not wrong. And when we do that, which there is a tendency to do, we're just adding another layer of emotion on top of our other emotion, which makes it harder for us to, even work with the original thing. And then things can sort of just layer and layer and layer, and it's just not helpful. And so we need to go back to accepting all the emotions are part of the full range of experience. Um, Okay, so if we go back to emotions are all telling us something we need to know. I'm going to give you some examples. So, enthusiasm. What might enthusiasm be telling us? That we have a passion or a purpose in an area. That it's something that energizes and lights us up. That's something to follow. Or what about anger? Anger can indicate that a boundary has been breached. There's an injustice that has occurred. There's something that needs to be healed or something that needs to be restored that has been lost. Jealousy, also very uncomfortable. People don't like to feel that way. Um, Sometimes that means that there's something that might be more important to you than you realized, and you're seeing it sort of on display in somebody else's life. Sometimes it indicates a need for change in priorities toward that thing, or just an awareness, okay, that is something I would like in my life. Sometimes it can indicate a need for more inner work, if it has to do sometimes with insecurity, and to do some work around remembering that you have this inherent value as a unique individual, and we all belong, and we're all important, and we all have a unique life path. Um, or it can indicate more spiritual practices might be beneficial. I think sometimes of this example with a telegram, like the person who would come with a message, to think of emotions that way, like that's just there's a message here for you. And with the telegram example, like if we don't answer the door, we don't want to get the message, we don't want to feel it, they're going to keep coming back, knocking, ringing the doorbell. I have something to say, I have something to say. And sometimes then it sort of explodes, gets louder and louder and louder till we will listen to the message. So we don't want to like lock out the person with the telegram to deliver, or like shove them under the rug, which happens a lot with emotions. Let's just shove this under the rug, like you don't have the telegram out on, your front porch under the rug. And you also don't need to like invite them in to stay with you for days and weeks and months and years. Some emotions take longer to process and work through for sure, and we have to always give that its due time. But we can learn to work with it, and it doesn't have to become like permanently lodged as part of our being. And that's where the skills come in that I'm going to talk about in the later episode. What to do with that message, what to do with that emotion, because it is an energy that's running in your system, and usually you're going to feel better and then be able to cope with the next thing better when you've been able to address it, and that sort of thing. So in the big picture, if we think about where our emotions guiding us, we can break it down into sort of two areas. There's internal, and then there's external. Some kind of awareness of your inner landscape or your outer circumstances. Some kind of processing, some kind of thought, reflection, some kind of change. You might need some self, compassion, kindness to yourself. Give yourself the time and space and energy to explore, what is this emotion telling me about, an inner work or an outer change. So what are some examples of that? Let's say you feel really peaceful and connected, and you're out on a nature walk, or you're sitting by the water. And so what that tells you is, oh, I feel good when I'm in nature. So maybe I want to have more of that in my life, and just having that realization and going, okay, how do I create that? How do I build that into my regular routines and into my calendar, because I see that I do feel better when I'm in nature. Um, or maybe you notice, oh, after I, have this social media scroll time, or an exchange with this particular person, I tend to feel really bad about myself. And exploring why is that, and looking into, are there some internal adjustments there? Are there some habit changes that need to happen? Um, that's all stuff that you can explore. And what's interesting is sometimes when we do the inner work, the outer circumstances change to match. So it's the saying, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. That does happen. Also, sometimes the circumstances do need to change, and sometimes it's hard for people to see that and to make bigger changes, or to make changes that are really a habit, or that there's a lot of beliefs around that they have to keep, it has to be this way. Those can get in the way of making the change. Um, and I'm going to give you an example. So let's say that you are a palm tree, and you have been planted in the north, and you're just not really thriving there. And so people are going, what do? We need to give it this kind of this treatment. then that's not really working in this other treatment, and we need some structures around to hold you up, and this intervention and that intervention, and there's all these problems, and it's taken a lot of work and a lot of effort. And in this case, what if the solution is a change in circumstance? The palm tree is going to be flourishing when we move it to its tropical climate, for example. That would be an example where we just need to shift the circumstances, and now everything kind of falls into place. Okay, so ideally, we have the self-awareness and we have the emotional awareness to reflect on these kinds of things and to find out, what we want to do with it. Something else to know about emotions is that they can really become habits. They can become patterns, and they can get really stuck in some way. Some of those patterns will serve us really well, and some of them do not. And we are all, wired in a different way, and we all have kind of a unique nature, and we also have different emotional styles. We have different upbringing, we have different cultures, we are, raised in a different generation with a different way of being. Perhaps we have different things that we've inherited. And I think that the key is to really acknowledge that, but then always also hold that there is room for change. There's always room for growth. And, what percentage that is, I don't know. But just kind of having the acceptance of this is my wiring or predisposition, and I know that I have power to create changes for myself as well. So when people talk about the inherited piece, oh, this is in my DNA, for example, I like to think, instead of the word genetics, I like to think of the word energenetics. And so I'm thinking of generational patterns, of ancestral patterns, which can be healed and changed. And I think looking at it that way can also create more space for the possibility. The field of epigenetics actually shows this to us, that genes can be changed through intention, through lifestyle, through our choices. Certain genes can be turned on or off. So we know scientifically that there is room to maneuver there. And on a related note, the science of neuroplasticity shows us we can rewire circuits in the brain. We can grow new connections. We can forge new pathways and create new neurons. And all of this affects how we think and how we react, and can improve our emotional health as well as our physical health, by the way. And again, some of the practices that help with that, I'll be sharing in the next, not the very next episode, but a future episode about a whole bunch of skills. The other piece to know is that people can have a different emotional range. So if you would picture like a sphere, a circle, and picture it expanding out, bigger or smaller. So some people might have sort of a smaller sphere, and their emotional range kind of stays a little bit more contained. And some people's is going to be bigger and have a really vast range within all of the emotions. So for example, people, those of us who are highly sensitive or empaths, neurodivergent, there can be a lot of emotional intensity. And so this is like feeling more depth in all of the ways. So that can be beauty and wonder and awe. And it can also be, frustration, anger, profound sadness. It kind of goes all the way around that sphere with intensity. And again, there is nothing to feel bad about that. And in fact, this is experiencing the full richness of life when we have all of these emotions. And we are here in this life with the consciousness we have, the wiring we have, the way we are to experience life as us. Okay, let's see here. We talked a little bit about how emotions are then meant to move through us. We talked about all those biochemical reactions that happen when we have an emotion. And what happens is if it doesn't move and it's just kind of staying stuck, we get these imbalances leading to, emotional symptoms or physical symptoms. It can be the onset of disease or conditions. And this is all sort of like a stagnated energy. Um, and by the way, this is why movement is so helpful, or exercise, so helpful for our emotional health. I probably will talk about this in a future episode, but basically, when we move our bodies, what it's doing is clearing out. Like when we exercise, it is literally clearing out some of the stress hormones, cortisol and adrenaline, and so on, that are circulating in the bloodstream. And so that's why it's so helpful emotionally and for our physical health. But we'll talk about that some more later. Um, so let's just go back to remembering that the majority of people are not taught a lot about emotions or what to do with them. How to be healthy and skillful with them. And so I'm going to talk about sort of the norm or the not so healthy ways that we tend to be used to or see a lot of. And there's kind of the quieter ways, which is, you know, repressing the emotion, just sort of shoving it inside, or avoiding it, denying it, suppressing it. This is very common, and it's sort of about maybe there's just not a comfort or a knowing what to do. So we sort of pretend and just try to bottle it up inside. This can also be a feature of people pleasing. Like, I'll just put my own emotions inside so other people will be happy or will think everything's fine. And this is, maybe it's not safe to show my emotion, or it wouldn't be responded to in a helpful way, or it wouldn't be understood. And this is just because we don't know how, and maybe nobody showed us better. And that's hard on our systems in a number of ways. And it's not being good to ourselves or true to ourselves or authentic. So it's something we want to shift out of. And this pattern of sort of repressing or suppressing emotions, it can lead to sort of escape in its various forms. So that can mean just sort of disconnecting from yourself or disengaging from life, trying to cover up emotions that you don't know what to do with through addiction of any kind. And then the other way, there's sort of these louder ways that are unhealthy ways to work with emotion. And that we see that when there's a lot of aggression or someone who sort of like throws their emotions at somebody else. Sometimes it'll be a specific person, and sometimes it's just like throw the emotion all over the room. It can be to an anonymous person. So we see this with like road rage, for example, or someone just blowing up at a customer service person or whatever else, someone they randomly come across in the world. And it's like there's been all this stuff building and building, and they just like blow it all out. And it's this big, aggressive kind of reaction. And sometimes there's also people who will like dramatize. That's another louder way, is like sort of adding more and dramatizing the emotion. And that, because there's some benefit like attention or whatever else, I don't think that's very common, but it is something some people tend to do. And it's just sort of a pattern. But basically what happens in all of these examples is when we don't deal with our emotions in a healthy way, we implode and everything sort of can like collapse in or explode and throw it all over. And we just see this when people are pushed to their limits with someone or something, when there's too many layers, when too much is coming at you too fast, when there's not enough time and space and energy and skill to process and clear things, when there's not enough support. around working with that emotion or around life, and we don't know how to do it another way. When people are just running on empty, as we know, some emotions will just drain us and wear us out and kind of wear us down. And without enough time and space toward those renewing emotions that can rebuild us and help us handle that, we can just kind of go flat. And so, again, we have that imploding or exploding. Now, I do see that there's more teaching around emotions now, and I would say we're just going to increasingly recognize the importance more. And that teaching can happen, parent to child, and also in schools, teacher to students, or a caretaker to a child, or whatever else. And so there's a little more talking about emotions, which is great. The thing is that it's not always backed up through modeling. And so then it becomes a bit meaningless, or even almost can make things worse. Like, um, so people will sometimes want to know, someone else's emotions. How are you feeling? Let's talk about that. But if the person in power isn't also showing that they're comfortable with their emotions and are comfortable sharing them, then that's not really helpful. That doesn't invite a true connection or a sense of safety in sharing. Or we see sometimes where something happens in a group or a situation, a family or a school, and the people in charge sort of don't address it, and don't address the fact that that may have had an emotional, effect on others. And in not doing so, it's kind of one of those forms of like denial, or it's sort of like, let's hide it, let's brush it aside, let's just not talk about it. Maybe that will make it better. Maybe they'll be like it didn't happen. Maybe it will pass faster that way. But it kind of teaches repressing and denying and negating in a really indirect way. Versus just acknowledging what happened and checking in and letting people know that however they might feel is fine. Um, we can also sometimes have where there's like an invitation about sharing emotions, but then there's the response isn't held with respect or in a skillful way. So it can be like people will be criticized then, or told that emotion is wrong, or you're wrong, or that's bad, you shouldn't feel that way. So now you're being criticized or judged for sharing, or misunderstood. And so that's just going to shut down people's desire to be attuned into their own emotions, or to share them, or know how to work with them. We also see another kind of unhealthy pattern is sometimes there's certain people who are like allowed to have certain emotions, and certain people who aren't. So this can happen with like gender roles, for example, where it's like the females aren't really allowed to be angry, but the males maybe are. Or the males aren't really allowed to have sadness, but the females are. So sometimes that happens. And sometimes there's also like one person in a group who can like display all their emotions, but nobody else really can. I've seen that in different circumstances as well. And then there's also sometimes like cultural or family units, places or generations even, where certain emotions are allowed by everyone and certain emotions are not. Like, even so, anger is a common one, sadness is a common one, but also actually there can be sometimes where enthusiasm and happiness aren't really allowed, and they kind of get shut down, and people don't know what to do with them. And so it can be any number of these things. And so we just have to give ourselves and others a lot of grace sometimes around emotions, knowing that most people are really not taught about them, or healthy ways to work with them. And the lovely thing to know, though, then, is that working with emotions in a healthy way is actually very, very simple, even if it takes some time to get comfortable with it. And it's kind of these steps. Number one, just having the awareness. about them. Number 2 is acknowledging them without judgment. And number 3 is just you note them, you witness them, you process them, you see what is the message here, what is the information, and take that and work with it. And then number 4 is you let them move through and you clear it out. Again, more on that in my future episode, and in the very next one is going to be one of my favorite tools for working with emotions. Super, super empowering. Okay, so to remember as we wrap up, I would encourage you or invite you, if you haven't already, listen to my episode 2 and 3 on self-awareness and how to build it, because that's really foundational to emotional awareness and will help you kind of quickly get improvements in that area for yourself. Remember, number 2, that emotions are just energy in motion. Think about emotion. Energy in motion, just a form of energy. It can be transformed. Number 3, remember that emotions are information, that they can help guide us with choices that serve us or do not. Number 4, remember that you are in control about how you handle that energy of emotion as it rises. As you learn, you can learn the skills and the tools and the practices to be able to handle that with more skill and more ease. And also remembering emotions are part of the human experience. They are meant to be experienced, and working with them is a part of our personal growth. It is a part of our personal evolution. And I want to share with you as we close. I love this. This is from Dave Rico, a psychotherapist. This is a quote from him that I really love, and I'm going to read to you. Okay, so it says, personal progress does not mean becoming a wooden boy, but a real boy. Pinocchio's eyes can water, his veins can pop, his teeth can chatter, his lips can smile. He is not an escapee from life, but an arrival in it. We are saddened at loss, angry at injustice, scared by danger, and exuberant in good fortune. And by the way, this is from the book. I'll see if I can hold it up here if you're watching the video. This is from a book I wrote a while ago. Dave and Elizabeth and a bunch of other wonderful experts helped contribute to this book that I wrote that talks a lot about emotions. This is just a book I self-published for now, and I'll put a link to it if you're interested in the show details. So that's a wrap for today. Thank you so much for listening and taking the time to learn about this. I really hope that it's helpful for you. And if so, I hope that you will also subscribe and follow, like the show. This helps other people find it. You can watch the video on YouTube or listen to the audio on Apple and Spotify. So, and please tell your friends if you think that they might benefit from this information too. All right, thank you and take care. Bye-bye.